Hello and welcome to another sponsor interview for the Big Bull Show 2022. We have the amazing Katrina Kellett from Purl Yarns. Katrina, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you could make the time.
Chantelle, it's a pleasure. Always a pleasure for the Big Bull Show. It's a big part
It
of my
is,
calendar this year.
it's becoming a regular part of our calendars, isn't it?
I know, I like it. I hope it continues in my calendar.
Me too. Me too. So, Katrina, you've been a sponsor for the Big Bull Show before, and you're a sponsor again. What made you decide to put your hand up and go, "Let me do that"?
Look, the first year I did it, I was really frightened about whether or how it would go and what I should do. And then I had such a fun time being one of the big sponsors that I just thought, oh, sign me up again. I'm a bit of a master at like eluding the limelight. And so it was a bit of a personal challenge that a friend laid down to me to go, hey, can you walk towards the light rather than step into the shadows? And so it was a bit of an experience to sort of open up the doors and go, here I am, and this is me, and I dye the wool. And I had such a warm response from everyone participating in the weekend that it just bowled me over. And I thought, oh, I want more of that.
It's a bit like that, isn't it? As especially those, like, 'cause, I mean, we've had 2 years, and it's grown year on year, and I know from other discussions that it's one of these things where it's like, because it was an unknown, the response has been, like, overwhelmingly positive. It's you kind of like you expect the unknown to be a bit, like, down to start with. It's like, "Oh, it was alright. It was its first year."
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
we didn't have that.
I find it's a really enabling event and connecting in terms of people in small pockets, broadly dispersed, being able to hold hands and go, hey, we all have this passion and we're interested, and from wherever we are, we can dip in and out as we have time.
And I love how you put that. It's not just an enabling event. It's also an event that brings everybody together as well, even though we're not together. Like, it's a virtual event. So like during the COVID, we had to learn all these new ways to do this, to create community and to create cohesiveness in industry while not being in the same room. And I think this has been a really fun sort of side benefit from that.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a sort of an element to perhaps creativity or our crafting lives, which are often private and on our sofas alone watching TV or, listening to music. It's kind of opened the door on that and helped us realize we weren't so alone when we might have felt we were. So
Yeah,
I definitely,
I think people realize. I think you're right. We've realized that while we're alone on the sofa by ourselves, if you just jump onto, your local group's page or whatever, there's somebody else doing exactly the same thing that you're doing right now.
yeah, it's a virtual way of holding hands and continuing creating. And I like that
I
about it.
like it too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool. So, Pirate Pearl Yarns, that has to have like a pretty decent story to it. Like, I would say. I guess. I'm guessing, like, I don't know, it was just came to me, but no. So how did it come to be? Like, what made you get into dyeing? What made you choose the name Pirate Pearl Yarns?
Yeah, look, the origin story for Pirate Pearl Yarns is a bit of a fun. I mean, elements of it are consistent with many other stories, but certainly the naming story is a bit of its own thing. And
Yeah.
and certainly, I guess I was living in Germany for a little stretch because my husband had some research fellowships, and we were abroad for extended periods. And I was like, well, I can't work. I did project management and mentoring for the university, and he is a mathematician, science person, and he had these fellowships, and I was in these towns where I didn't really know anyone, and so I knew that my mum taught me to knit, and that in theory I should be able to do lace. So I found a
Yeah.
lace pattern, and I found a yarn store where the lovely lady Irma didn't speak any English, and I had poor German, and I spent a lot of time hanging out there and started to discover that she had all these really wonderful yarns that were very different to what Cleckheaton and Peyton's that I'd seen growing up in a country town. And I was like, just fascinated by these different yarns. So when I returned from that was probably around 2015 that I was kind of curious about the wool industry in Australia and what we had to offer here. And I went out to the Nundle wool mill with some friends of mine because we were interested in the production side of wool manufacturing, and my dad's an old machine mechanic, so he's always hasn't met something yet that he couldn't fix. And so I was fascinated in the machines and got talking to Nick at Nundle, and he was like, well, come back and spend a longer time, ditch your friends. I'm happy to walk you through some of the process. And it was during that visit that he said to me, you have to look in our dye room and just, you've looked at all these other steps in production, have a look at dyeing. And I was like, that's the one part I'm really not that interested in, to be honest. I just wanted to know how it's made and how the machines work and where the fiber comes from. And I'm passionate about all those things, but the dyeing really isn't my bag, and I'll give it a miss. And he said, look, you're here now, just give it a little go. So he taught me how his method was, and we did like a little example, and I was like, okay, well, all right, I'm probably not going to do any more of that, but maybe sometime. Maybe, like sometime I might try and improve my first really bad effort at dyeing, just because whenever I do something, I tend to like to continue to improve it until it's nice, and then often I'm like, okay, I'm done with that.
Yeah.
So I'd come home and I was like starting to muck around. So Nick from Nundle, it's all your fault. Like,
I'm like, he was the gateway right there. No, come into the dye room.
That's right. Purl Yarns, trained by Nick Bradford. Then I started mucking around, and it just sort of, like many people's experience, you dye more than you can use, and your friends help you out or want to buy it, and things start. In that time also, while I was overseas, I'd started getting myself into the dark underbelly world of yarn bombing, and had met some wonderful people around the world just from like chat rooms where I was like, hey, I'm going to be in Amsterdam. Is there any other yarn bombing people? Do you want to hook up? Do you want to show me around your woods, your local yarn shop or whatever? And I met this lovely lady in Iceland, and she was like, dude, you need a tag. You're like not even tagging your work. Like, you're putting it up and no like name on it, like signing. I was like, okay. So I flew home from that trip, and a bit of an aside story, I often get bad ear pain when I'm on long flights with the pressure. So I have to take some tablets which often don't agree with me and keep me awake through the night thereafter. And so it was on one of these return long haul flights that I got home to my little flat in Newcastle and was weirdly awake in the middle of the night, rummaging around the fridge. I'd picked up some sushi as I came through the airport. So I've got the sushi and the sushi bag out of the fridge. And I'm sitting there on the sofa in the middle of the night, munching on sushi, really wide and awake, and doodling on this paper bag, thinking about what would be interesting, what would be relevant, what would fit for some sort of yarn bombing tag. And started doodling almost this quite terrible drawer, infantile type cartoonish character who was a bit mysterious and was almost like, I don't know, a young woman who maybe had a hook on one hand and had a like Buccaneers hat on with some needles through it. And I was starting to think, is this that kind of yarn? This character was coming to mind. Could have been a comic. I kind of had all the frames for a comic book in mind for this the adventure of this little person. And that's when I was like, oh, well, I think, okay, so it's probably a bit piratey, knitting, purling. And I have a lovely great aunt who was very inspiring to me, and her middle name is Purl as well. Spelled Pearl as in the black pearl.
The other pearl,
The other pearl. And she was this amazing woman from the land who raised her children on her own after her husband passed, and ran a dairy farm, and had prize-winning Jersey cows, and was just this real stalwart, and who also made the world's best ever sponges and chocolate sponge rolls. And whenever we'd go across to her house, which was maybe an hour away, I'd come home like travel sick, having eaten the whole of any bit of left. And this was the time where she never had a mix master, just did it by hand, and ended up with carpal tunnel from all the cakes she made. Anyway, so she was an inspiring person in my life who was very direct and very, very strong. And I kind of thought, how can I bundle or package all this into something that means something to me, that's sort of adventurous and travels, but is strong and means something and is sort of salt of the earth kind of person. So I ended up doodling on this bag, this little character, and then I'm like, I think maybe Pirate Purl. And so for a stretch, when I was yarn bombing, I was tagging it Pirate Purl. So after I then added in dyeing to things, thanks to Nick,
Good
and
on you,
having
Nick.
these yarns, my friends
Yeah.
were like, you can't call it something else because we already know you as Pirate Pearl.
Yeah.
So then it became, well, just Pirate Pearl yarns then? Like, and so
It
that became
works.
the beginning of that. And there's been a few different logos or faces of Pirate Pearl, and the current one, which is above my head there,
Yeah.
was a wonderful collaboration, and I'd showed it to a good friend of mine. So we've kind of got the yarn coming out the bottom of
Yeah.
it's all the sea,
It's
but
all swirly around as the
yeah,
ocean.
kind of anchored like in something that means something and strong and has some moral fiber. But also the original design, the ship was going direct along the horizon, and at some point my friend suggested I lifted the bow a little bit for life's rocky times because it's not always smooth sailing. So the bow of the ship is slightly elevated there, and that's because it's buffering some rough seas. And I think that's been probably true for many people over the last few years. So I'm grateful we incorporated it into the logo design. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love that it's so meaningful.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
It needed to
'Cause
mean something. I couldn't do just fluff. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like it didn't fit with me. It didn't match
Yeah.
me.
And
Like,
and it has to. It has to match you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I love
I think I've nestled into it now, and I'm like not sure that I could change it because I've kind of it's sort of grown with the business very much
yeah.
so.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So you talking about the time hanging out with Nick at Nundle Mills and so we know from chatting with you previously that you have I'm going to put it this way, particular um, sort of list of requirements in your supplies. Um, so did you want to go and share
Sure.
that again and
Yeah.
explain like because your yarn is always so extraordinary because it's not just random yarn imported from whatever company. And that's not
Yeah.
to say that they're not good and they're totally fine. It's just different.
It's just different. That's right,
Yeah.
Chantelle. Thank you for asking that question. In fact, I did begin because I had no options on those yarns that you often see the same yarn base and you can recognize. I also did use those, and
Yeah.
in my
And
first
so
year
did
or so,
I. I think most
did,
dyers do. Yeah.
yeah. So it's it's completely okay, and it's a
Yeah.
really hard road to go down to not use those, to be frank. So
Yeah.
definitely can respect people for using those. The
Yeah.
reason for me choosing not to work with those yarns are a couple of reasons. And I guess it's about people, place, and production qualities, like that they're really important for me. And so the ethos behind Pirate Pearl yarns is that we strive to tread really lightly. I don't want my hobby or my pastime to really outlive me. I'd be happy that it didn't have a lasting footprint on the planet. And so
Yeah.
when I make decisions about what to use and how to use it or who to approach, they're all things that I'm thinking, overthinking, rethinking, reviewing. And it takes a really
I don't
long
know
time.
anybody else who overthinks.
No, it can take a really long time to forge relationships and fibers. And some of those are right people, right place, right time kind of thing. And
Yeah.
others
It's
are about,
the stars have to align. Yeah.
yeah. And you have to work really hard. And there's often really rough seas and you have to hang on really tight because otherwise
Yeah.
you'd be thrown overboard by
Yeah.
some of the frustrations that you face. And
Yeah.
it's, I, at the beginning of the great period of the COVID, I felt like, doesn't matter, I'm all good, I'm all on shore. So it's not going to be an
Yeah.
issue. But even I was like,
Yeah.
swept off.
There's unexpected supply chain
Unexpected.
issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So for people who don't know my business, I buy all my yarns from Australian farms, and I can tell you which farm. So they're pretty much single origin, and they're non-superwash,
Yeah.
and there's no nylon. So the
Mhm.
no nylon component means sort of no plastics, and the no superwash as well because it's not been coated with anything. So it's had minimal
And it
processing.
hasn't had to travel overseas.
It also hasn't had the frequent flyer points. That's right.
Yeah.
So, and yarns that tick all those boxes of being wholly done onshore can be identified quite often now by the Australian Fibre Collective logo, which, if I turn
Yeah.
correct, there
There
you
you go.
go.
That's it. Yep.
If you're not familiar with it, they have a website, the Australian Fibre Collective, and there's on that website a list of people whose products are certified with them as wholly done onshore. Because often
Yeah.
it's possible with the Australian made logo to buy a material in and do some processing of it onshore. So
Yeah.
it's good to be clear about what the different logos signify about
Yeah.
Australian content or production. And for me, I had a small budget for this enterprise, and I felt like if I could spend it some way, I would like to spend it on other small businesses like mine so that we could just start to generate and build or rebuild or build anew a small woolen community here in Australia. And
Yeah.
I grew up in a farming area, lots of dairy. It's the low river country. So we're on Biripi land here in the Manning Valley on the east coast of Australia. And here it's almost like low river flats. I've got river on both sides of the property. We do flood. We have had several in recent times.
Yeah.
So I knew about farming and people having to make a living from the land and how tight that margin was. So I felt like if I was going to do some frivolous thing like colour yarn and make a pretty scarf, right,
Yeah.
that I wanted those inputs to go back to those guys and girls on the land so they could keep doing what gave them
What
joy.
they love to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, that kind of was a circle that was sort of rewarding or brought joy to me and hopefully other end users of the items.
Yeah.
So my first connection was with the Dennis family in Tarndie in Victoria, and they have a Polworth farm, and that's a different breed of sheep. So if you're unfamiliar with sheep breeds, there's merino.
Then you need to get your hands on some Polworth right now. Is all I'm going to say. It's like if you haven't touched Polworth, there is something wrong.
And to be true, I had not touched it before that point, and I was at a Knitters Guild meeting, and an older lady who was quite striking caught my eye, and I thought, oh, well, I don't fit in here. I'll sit with this lady. She looks nice. I'm sitting with her, and I admired her shawl, and she was telling me about the fibre. It was Polworth, and I'm like, what is that? Is that a place? Or she writes on the back of a napkin, Dennis family, and that was it.
Yeah.
And she's like, this stuff is better than sex. I guarantee it. Come back to me if you have any complaints. Here's my number. And so then, this began my journey of Dennis family. Google.
Yeah.
Go and see their sheep. They seem nice people. And they were very
They
kind.
seem all right.
And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'd like to do it with nice people because, that makes everything nicer. No one needs pain. Yeah. So Wendy especially was super, super helpful because I'd obviously only had a bit of quick coaching from Nick at the Nundle Wooler Mill before that about dyeing. And then Wendy at Tarndie was very helpful about sort of how she had been doing things for years and just sort of finding a way.
And in all fairness, different wools sometimes need a different skill. Like they may need different temperatures, they may need different acid levels. And someone who's done it before and done it on that wool before, it's always worth taking their advice. Or at least listening.
Yeah, oh, definitely. So for me, very much, I've been, mentored by great people before me. And so I've just picked up along the way and that's been really enjoyable. But I realized after a couple of events that I was like, wow, I only have this one yarn and it's this Blackbeard yarn, which is Polworth and silk. So it was drapey and lovely. And people were like, oh, well, what if I don't want that? You're a one trick pony kind of thing. And I was like, well, okay.
Oh, hang on. Am I?
All right. I never saw myself as a one trick pony, but okay.
Yeah.
Fair. I'll think about something else maybe sometime. And then a lady approached me, and that lady is Renelle from Cloverleaf Corridor stuff. She was like, well, I have this thing. I have this thing. Do you think you could do something with this thing? And I'm like, well, give it to, I'll have a look. I'm not sure.
Let me have a look at your thing and I shall see if I can turn the thing into other colors.
Yeah. So that was a similar but slightly different breed. And of course,
Yeah.
each stock is different and can have higher or lower micron counts and be coarser or finer. And so
Yeah.
if people watching this haven't had a lot of experience with breeds, it's an interesting area to get into, and there's some really helpful books around, like the Fleece and Fiber Source book. I think
Yeah.
Deb Robson wrote that. That's a really helpful one for just
That's a
reading about
great book.
different
Yeah.
sheep. And I think at one sheep show, I kind of daggily went along and bought a collection of sheep posters, which I'd found in a stall that were laminated, and felt a bit odd, but I had all these posters of different sheep up on the wall, and I could read about them underneath, because I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know anything either. I just grew up in Australia. We have merino. I didn't grow
Yeah.
up on a sheep farm.
And most people don't realize how many other sheep breeds we have other than merino in Australia.
Yes. And they all have
Yeah.
different properties, and it's not always easy to pop them into a yarn, for example, because
Yeah.
many factors. But the more the more the demand for it increases, I think the more drive there is for people in the industry to create it.
Yeah.
We're a little bit hamstrung at the moment without a wool scour for our darker fleeces. So
Yeah.
people might not have considered what happens with the dark fleece or dark sheep.
Yeah.
And
They are very much classed as a second-class citizen in the sheep world.
yeah, and so that
Yeah.
was something I learned from Wendy at Tandy, who'd had this passion project from like the 70s of like saving the little black lambs and creating a dark colored flock and having dark
Yeah.
yarns. And I just had no idea that that was even a thing. And that just, I was all of a sudden like, oh, I'm voting for the underdog, I'm going for that poor little black sheep. I'd like to see what I can do with that.
Yeah.
I can see why when Wendy had a passion for the darker.
Yes, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't it wasn't my first instinct, because I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's just
Well, it wasn't your first instinct because you didn't know it was a thing.
no. And even
Yeah.
the first few times I dyed on it, I was like, yeah, it's not kind of what I want.
Yeah.
Only as I've gotten more experienced, I'm like, actually, much better. Quite like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Really adds
over
complexity.
dyeing like a dark color with another color creates some of the most beautiful depths of color once you've worked out how to do it.
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
so I have at the moment, I've had a supply issue unexpectedly with Polworth this year. So I
Yeah.
haven't had my Blackbeard delivery. So most people would know me for the Blackbeard yarn base, which is a 4-ply fingering weight, drapey, soft, wear it under your shoes kind of sort of stuff. And this year I haven't had any to dye. So Tom, I'm sweating on you. I'm hoping
No pressure, Tom. No pressure.
next season there'll be plenty of beautiful shawl yarn again from Van Dwan Court team. But this year is not the year. And so this year I focused.
The thing that everyone who's watching, they need to understand is that these sheep are living, breathing things, and if it's a rough year, the fleeces can be affected. There's a lot that can affect a fleece and make it like it still has to be shorn off, but whether or not it can be utilized is a whole nother thing. And sometimes stuff happens.
I think for me, when I think about the yarn bases, it's kind of like this is the non-homogenized version. Like it's just it's not like a milk vat that's just where a factory has got milk from different suppliers, they've homogenized it all, and it's all now family uniform as it goes out.
Yeah.
This is like, oh no, this is boutique stuff. We've got a little batch of this and a little batch of that, and this year it's a bit like this. So there is variation throughout the seasons and the spins and the size of the spin. So even like a larger quantity spin will be more uniform than perhaps a smaller batch processing.
Yeah,
And
because it can nearly be homogenized more as a larger spin. So like rather than from multiple farms, it's multiple sheep, and it can be a little bit more homogenous. But when it's a smaller batch, any sort of outlying thing will stand out more.
That's right. There's not enough volume on the machines to even out the consistency. I'm sure if you're talking to anyone over the weekend with the wool mill, they'll be across that far great better than me. But
better than me.
I had the wonderful experience this year through hardship of being able to work with Claire and Paul at the Fibre Arts Shed on the coast. And
they are also sponsors here in the Big Wool Show.
So if you're watching this, check out Claire's video because that'll give you a little insight into the wool mill. So I had a tricky situation earlier in the year where not only did I not have my normal Blackbeard yarn from Tandy, the Cloverleaf Corriedale yarn hadn't come back from Wangaratta Woolen Mill. That's all processed onshore. But the Bendigo Woolen Mill had such great orders. They, of course, wanted to service their own needs first. And so
they got a little behind. Yeah.
Pushed everything back. So it was great. Everyone was home. They were all buying from Bendigo Woolen Mill and they were stocking up. And so Bendigo was like naturally spinning their stuff first and pushing everything back. And I was like, now I've gone from not having one supplier to like not having a second supplier. I have no supply, and I'm going to the sheep show in Bendigo, and I have nothing. And it was like a short period before that, like maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
Like, wow, so I've gone from...
I can't imagine you were stressing about that at all. No.
Relax. I took a strong sip of tea from my cup.
Yes, it's sipping time.
And I thought, well, what can I possibly do? And I'd phoned Claire just to nut out some, what will I do? And we often talk about our sheep show preparation. And in that conversation with Claire, she's like, well, you kind of know what to do with the wool, and I own a wool mill. I just started a wool mill and I'm still working the machines out. They didn't come with an instruction book, but I think I'm getting my eye in. We're evening out the bumps and things are getting better. Should we think about maybe trying to spin a yarn together? And I was like, haven't done that before, because there's usually a lot of problems with that, and I'd rather just leave it to the farmer to negotiate their own production. It's just a little bit less, one more project manager in the mix. But through no other option, I was like, well, all right, rough seas, I'm going to hang on tight. Let's, is there someone maybe we should contact? And so I reached out to Linda Jennings and Paul Linfield, who have a farm at Terralga, and they have a small flock, like maybe 30, a small flock of cows, which are almost pets. They're named and
they're lawnmowers.
Sort of a step up. They're not really lawnmowers. Their fleeces are stunning. And so I talked to them and they're like, wow, you really sound like you're in a bind, lady. And I'm like, yeah, you wouldn't believe I'm moving house. And I've got, anyway, so they're at Terralga and on New South Wales, between sort of Sydney and Canberra direction, roughly. And I was driving the next day past there with a small van full of furniture to move some of my home goods from Newcastle, where I'd been for ages, to Canberra, where my husband is working. Yeah. So I was like, it's going to sound odd, but can I just pull off the highway and swing in and have a look and check out your sheep? And so we did that. And they were, of course, gloriously welcoming and lovely, and showed me their sheep and some fleeces they had. And I'm like, all right, I'll take all of these. This is great. So, I've never bought fleeces, and I really didn't have enough of a good idea, but I had some idea. And dropped off my furniture in Canberra, drove back. It was the East Coast low. So blowing a gale, flooding happening on their property. I'm like pulling it in the storm. They're throwing bags in the back of the van, and I head on further up the highway for some hours and get to Claire, and she's almost flooding as well. And I'm like, I've got all these fleeces. Here's 50 kilos. Throwing it out the van. It was all quite. It was just really quite demented. And I was like, oh, I've been like shopping for like light cream, mid brown, dark brown. We're going to mix things up and make a yarn. We've never done it before, but it's going to be great. We're all like a bit nervous about that. So anyway, some weeks later, after we'd all like dried out a little bit, I went back and spent probably a week or so with them, actually in the mill, processing the yarn, like washing it, because it wasn't scoured. It was just hand washed by me and Claire and Paul, which was quite the labor of love, because it went on
50 kilos hand washed. Yes. Yeah, that is a labor of love.
We hand washed it, we, opened it, put it through the picker, carded it, did all the things, put it through the spinner, and still all of that's a bit of a dark art in terms of getting things just right. It's like learning an instrument and knowing how to make it sing, and there was still very much getting to know their machines and working out just, here's my goal. This is what I want. I don't know anything about your machines, but this is what we're going to work towards. And so we went on this wonderful and sometimes very frustrating journey of trying to know which thing to tweak to get just the right thing. And, And even then, even when we had nutted all that out, or Paul had nutted it all out and read all the books that he could read about things, the humidity would be against us, or something else would happen. And
Yeah, because it is like it's so dependent on everything.
and it's hard in a not massive factory setting to control all those atmospheric things.
Yeah,
Small shed with the doors open, and there's an East
because
Coast
it's
lot,
hot.
all of those things. And
Yeah,
so you realized it wasn't as simple as hopping online and placing an order for 50 kilos of something fairly uniform from a large supplier that when it
yeah,
turned up would be skeined perfectly, and you just pull it out of the bag and put it in the pot. There was
yeah,
just so much more effort involved in the people, the production,
yeah.
and just so from going from, I'd like a nice yarn that looks like this and does this and would wear like this, it was just a wild ride for all of us to get to the end.
Wow.
And
Please
then
tell
when
me you got yarn out of all of that. And it wasn't just, well, that was an interesting story.
yeah, look, I got a few yarns out of it.
You did.
um,
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if you can see on the screen. Yeah, these yarns here in the naturals kind of range were
Yeah.
the light, medium, and dark, and we knew the names of the sheep was Spidey and Garage, and you know,
Oh, wow.
and
They're beautiful.
like me going grey as I get age, so did the sheep. And so some of the sheep fleeces that I had bought from 1 year, that I bought from maybe 2 years, they kind of got darker the next year,
Yeah.
or greyed off. And so the sheep might have started out like quite black, but then it was sort of greyed off.
Yeah.
Second time the next time they sheared
Yeah.
it. And so I'd be like, oh, I want all of Spidey's fleeces because he's a beautiful silver grey. I'm thinking George Clooney, salt and peppery, handsome yarn. And then when I got the second year's cut, I was like, oh, it's way lighter again.
It's
So,
lighter. Yeah.
I'd taken photos along the way of like this beautiful caramel color that I was going to have. And by the time we got the thing at the end, I was like, yeah, it's not really caramel anymore. It's somewhat, more
Yeah, it's
oatmeal.
like a blondie gray. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, how does that happen? Anyway, so that was before even adding any color to it or putting it in any pot. There was just this enormous journey up and down the
Wow.
East Coast. But I guess it didn't go in too many vehicles. It just went in mine a couple of times.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It didn't go on a plane
no,
or a
it's only been
train or a truck.
no,
So
it's been in the back of a thrift van.
you were talking about your move during that. So because I did notice that you are not where you were last year.
Yeah.
So amongst all of this, you've had to move as well, obviously.
Yeah. So last year when we talked, I was in a community arts centre with a bunch of other
Yeah.
artists like painters and ceramicists, and I've been there for about 6 years and loving it. And it was really hard, but people on my social media feed might have noticed around July a big empty truck and me putting stuff in the back of a truck, and that was me moving out of my art centre studio, which wasn't perfect, but was really good.
It did what you needed it to do.
Yeah. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I think I can make it work in a home studio setting, in a garage, in a rental property in Canberra. And so that was July. And so right before the big wool show, before the sheep show, Bendigo Sheep Show, I packed all my stuff in a box knowing I don't know when this will come out and I don't know when I'll have another studio. So I went to the sheep show, sold my yarns, and then came back and had COVID and couldn't work. And also, my husband hadn't really told me that the rental property we had, the garage, whilst it has like a hose cock, the electrics didn't work where I was going to put the wall of burners.
Oh.
And the water plumbing, still there was no wastewater. And so I was kind of going to need to work outside with a hose. And it was just July in Canberra and it's cold.
Yeah, I'm just going to go and work in the yard.
I was like, oh, I've gone from a community where I'm connecting with people every day and having a cup of coffee with a friend once a week. And we're talking about our professional development and our colors and different, setting ourselves different challenges to work towards and, all of that kind of community engagement to, just work out in a yard in the cold with
the hose
and a beanie.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so
that would definitely be confronting.
that wasn't quite how I saw it playing out, and so that wasn't, no dyeing was done there.
Yeah.
And so now I'm doing a bit of a pop-up dye studio, and it's on my family property in the mid-north coast. And here we have an old hand-built cottage that was from early 1900s,
Yeah.
and like there's gaps in the old floorboards where you can, I dropped a needle earlier today and it went straight down the hole under the house because it was like a gap in the floorboard. So anyway, it's drafty, but good thing it doesn't get that cold here.
Yeah.
And we also have an old school building on the property, which my father moved in the 80s up from the corner paddock. It's a 60-acre property, and this was the old community school for this region where people used to
Yeah.
travel by boat or horse and walk to this school building. And the original school building was, I think, late 1800s, and it burned down. And this is the newer one, which was built in 1929 that I'm in. So hence we still have the chalkboard behind me, which is from there. And so this school building was used to teach, once they closed it as a public school, it was used to teach sort of community arts stuff. So I feel like we're taking it back to that. So my dad had a little kitchen like in the tea room behind this blackboard. So I've got a little sink there, and it's just like a small kitchenette, I guess, for when the teacher might have a cup of tea. So I'm working in behind this blackboard with a sink and trying to work my way around this small kitchen. It's working better than Canberra was. So
I mean, the tap is inside.
That's right. There's electricity.
And B, there'd be power.
That's right. And I hooked up the rainwater tank. So I'm working on rainwater now, which I thought might have a significant difference to my colours, but it hasn't.
Oh, lovely, because that is a concern, pH levels. Yeah,
when you change waters, that can change the effect on the wool and the pH level in the pot. So I'm on rainwater, and that's we don't have any town water here, so like that's the only option. And so that rainwater and the waste from the dyeing process just goes out on my rose bushes in the garden, and I'm obviously trying to be fairly mindful of the water usage, as well as the impact on the environment. So I try not to have. That's another thing. People might notice I don't really do speckles and things, and that's for two reasons. One, there's lots of excess dye always because that's the nature
of speckles. Yep.
And secondly, just because it's non-superwash, those speckles become smears rather than speckles.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I don't do that, and that also helps with my wastewater because it's just because we're river frontage. We're also really mindful that our wastewater is going back into the water stream. So we try to have very little.
And being able to exhaust out your water all of the time means that you can reuse the same water.
Yes, that's right. Indeed.
Yeah.
Correct.
So if you can't exhaust your water properly, which you can't usually when you're speckling, it means that you have to ditch that water and start fresh every time. So being able to exhaust it, and do you and I know not everybody does because it depends on the land that they're on. Do you in some way neutralize the water before you tip it onto your roses, or is it all good?
I've also got some lovely hydrangeas that are loving the slightly higher acid content from the citric acid that goes into mine.
Is it changing their flower color?
Yeah.
I love that. That's one of the things I absolutely love the most about hydrangeas is you can tell the soil's acid level by what color flower you're getting.
That's right. So so it's a bit of a cyclic thing here, and we try not to have too many weird inputs in things and try to minimize the dye use so that there's no waste.
I look, I'm sitting here, I'm like taking it all in, and it blows my mind because like I was a dyer and I did speckles and I used superwash and I did all these things, but because I also was like, oh man, it's a bit dry here, and I'm on town water, but I'm not a heathen, and so I'll be tipping it in the gardens and like trying to do the best I could do, but with a city girl mentality. Right? Like that's a city girl mentality, right? My biggest thing is I just didn't want to flush it down the toilet. It was the end goal. Or tip it in the sink and let it go, bye-bye. But just thinking about all the different steps that you're going through, from sourcing local wools, using small farms, the pitfalls and advantages of that, because there's both. Um,
Mm.
and but in all of these, like, various hiccups and roadblocks and rough seas,
Yeah.
you're still smiling and you're still happy and you're still creating. Have you found that with all this sort of turbulence that you've had with all the supply chain issues and all the moving and things like that, are you finding that the dyeing is like the glue?
I've found I haven't been able to dye really for a long time, but when I returned to the dyeing, that it brought me such joy that I was like, yeah, this is the thing. This is really
Yeah,
good. Now I've been treading water up until this point
yeah,
by continuing to create small projects, like a little bit of a lifeline,
yeah,
or a line back to that dyeing
yeah,
that I like. No, I enjoy this whole of the picture. I'm not. I don't think I'm more attached to one part of the process than another. That's the whole of the pie. If I didn't have awesome suppliers, that
yeah,
would probably break the chain. If I didn't want to create beautiful things, that would break the chain. If I couldn't dye sustainably, then that would break the chain. It's kind of the whole of that thing. And if it didn't bring other people the joy that it brings me, then I'd just be drowning in all this colorful yarn, which would just be bonkers. So I think I
yeah,
have quite a balanced approach to it in terms
yeah.
of but I have to confess, I did feel very satisfied when I could stand back and look at my rack of drying yarns and go, yeah, someone's going to like them. And if they don't, I'll keep them. That's fine. I like them too. So
That's awesome.
kind of quite peaceful,
Yeah,
as a, so I can, because it's quite windy here at the moment, I can dry the yarns outside under the mango tree and they kind of get nice breeze off the river. And so, I'm not having to dry them in a drying cupboard or, put the heater on
yeah,
them. I'm fortunate that the conditions locally aid that process happening quite quickly.
yeah, the floorboards will aerate them out as well.
That too, well ventilated.
Yep, well ventilated yarn. So we've got the Big Wool Show coming up really soon. Do you have anything that you want to show us?
Ooh,
Maybe something that you might have in your hot little hands, for us to see, that to talk about, and also, if are you? I mean, are you running any show specials or promotions?
yes, I have some things, and yes, there will be some fun treats for the weekend, which people might be happy about, as I don't
Yeah,
do that very often,
no,
um, because of the margin. Um,
yes, and
yeah,
also supply issues.
yes, yes. There are things I've made that I would love to show, and there are
Oh,
a few
I'd
things
love to
that
see. I'm
kind
going to
of
make you big so we can
make
see.
Okay,
Yep.
so some things, but firstly, a question for shoppers. Think about fitness for purpose of the yarn to the project you have in mind. Because I
Yes.
often find people maybe haven't thought about that because different yarns or fiber have different qualities and make better things. So some things aren't well suited to a jumper because they might stretch or be
Yeah,
drapey or
the draper's too much,
but they're
and not
perfect.
enough.
So
Yes,
just think
absolutely.
about and I'm a great dabbler in knitting other fibers because they make different stuff. So I've just in reference to that comment, a couple of
Yes.
examples from my wardrobe. So
Okay.
here's something which most people would say is too scratchy for them, but makes a fabulous garment. And honestly, I don't wear it naked. So it's obviously not touching my skin
Exactly
also much.
right. It's not touching your skin that much.
So this cardigan is made from an Icelandic yarn called Lopi, which
Yep.
most people haven't really tried, and I wear it all the time, and it's really hardy and sturdy and doesn't tear on the gates
Which
and
is why it's
arms,
so popular in Iceland.
which is perfect. And in Canberra, it is also quite cold, so that was handy
Yep.
there. Here's a different type of fiber, which is nice and fuzzy and fluffy, but in terms of fitness for purpose for a garment, this is Nutiden yarn from Sweden.
Yeah.
The elbow is wearing a little bit thin, but I have worn
Yeah.
this heaps, and it's light and cozy and mohairy and sort of fluffy, but it's just
Yeah.
sweet cheap yarn. And
And
then
and with people often forget the importance of choosing the right yarn for the right project.
correct.
Mm.
So this is Corridale, so it doesn't have the halo or the fuzziness, but is still a really sturdy but very soft, but not as soft as
Yeah.
marine garment, which I made for the sheep show, and I still haven't picked buttons. So I steeped it and still haven't finished it. Sorry, folks. So
But Like the advantage with that one is because it doesn't have the halo, it means you can do more of the color work and the stitch definition is visible.
Right. So I just thought people might want to see the drape or the lack
That's
of drape
beautiful.
or dirtiness of the
Yeah.
corridor. So
And
that's
it'll mean that your garment holds its shape. You can wash it and
Yep.
it will go back into shape.
Yep. So from my pile here, because I was a bit slow on the button front with that cardigan, which is incidentally is called a Floribunda cardigan by Susan Crawford. My girlfriend knit me a brown version because I look good in brown, and hers was finished. Yep. But this is also Corridale as well. So it's quite
lovely.
Warm where the colour work is. So I'll have heaps of this yarn in the shop on the weekend.
Fantastic. So everyone can make their own Floribundas.
So for people who don't really want a whole garment, because who's got time?
She just throws at it. Sorry.
How about a single skein hat? Also,
look at the stretch on that.
So a word on Corridale. A few people have contacted me and said, "Is it itchy?" Well, obviously I wear pretty scratchy wool.
Yeah, it's a personal choice.
I'm not the right person to answer that. So my solution is I'm put together some minis skeins of the different bases here, so that people who just want to dip their toe in the water and see, maybe knit a swatch, pin it inside their shirt, see if it's too scratchy for them. There'll be some little taste packs on the weekend.
Oh, so that's fantastic.
What's this non-superwash stuff and is it awful? Well, I'll just have some little things that aren't a big financial investment, so you can just try it and see if it's your thing. Buying more. But if you feel like you can afford a whole skein, you could make a really nice hat. Yeah. That's the classic ribbed hat by Purl Soho. That just took one ball of that mainstay.
Yoink.
The other thing I'm going to have on the weekend are some lovely, because I never do this because I just don't like doing it, but I'm having some kits made up. There'll only be a few of them available, so don't delay into it.
If you want the kit, get in straight away.
I recently test knit for Susanna Kartinen or Sanna & Co, I think is her Instagram handle. She's in Victoria. So I just knit this. It would have been Kitchener stitched off, but I mucked it up this morning. So this beautiful cowl is reversible.
That a double knit cowl? Oh my gosh.
Rights inside. It's just knit as a tube and then you stitch it up
and then you fold half of it in. Oh my gosh.
That's quite nice.
Gorgeous. And it's just one skein of each.
So it's 100 grams of one and 50 of the other. So I've put together 6 or 5 sets, I think maybe, of this with the pattern and the yarn. So if you want to also buy a gift for someone, all they'll need is the knitted.
Perfect. All they need to do is knit it. Perfect gift for a knitter. And it looks adventurous as well, but not like a huge project.
Yeah, this bit's not boring.
Yeah.
So that's quite nice.
Also, hashtag not boring.
Hashtag not boring. That's me. That's you can beige and hashtag not boring. This is another cowl by Susanna Kartinen, which is called the Aita cowl, and I'll have a small quantity of these available as kits with the pattern and the yarn.
Oh wow!
So one skein of the Blackbeard yarn. Now I only have limited supply, like maybe 20 or 30 balls.
Do you have a recommendation for an alternative if they can't get the Blackbeard?
Yes. Also beautiful in the new 4-ply Corridale yarn. This is an example of it. It's a little bit toothier, but I think it still would make, you can imagine.
It would still work, yeah. Yeah, we have to visualize, because for those of you that are listening right now because they're knitting, she's just wrapped a skein of yarn around her neck. Like none of us have ever done that before.
So this is quite snuggly and would make equally a nice Ada cowl as well, I think. And I've got heaps of this in these colours over here. So
oh wow, yeah.
Should be able to find something in that colour palette there that works.
Yeah, I think so. There's some beautiful colours in there. Yep.
Onto my yarn samples with the Starwood yarn.
I'm just picturing this pile of just stuff next to you.
Yeah. So these bad boys, which we talked about earlier, which were made on the Central Coast.
Yep.
I've knit into a few different things. Here's an example of a small project. This is a design
Oh,
by
those colors are amazing.
So that's called the zircon beanie, and
Yeah,
this is 3 natural tones with just a pop of the red mainstay, which is the other corridor.
yeah,
So they're both how to explain? One is woolen spun and one is worsted spun, which if you're a
yeah,
newbie means nothing. But I just want to tell you they work together. And if you're an oldie who's experienced and knows, they work together. Okay,
yeah,
that's all I want to say. So that's another small project. Which, if you bought like some little mini skeins,
yeah,
maybe some mini skeins or a skein of one
yeah.
of them,
You could have some really interesting stripies.
you could make a little beanie or something with that.
Yep,
That's an idea.
I
Or
love
if you
that.
bought little sets of minis, you could do some color work in a sweater like this bad boy. Now, if you've watched all the YouTube videos, you'll see that Claire from Fiberific Shares also made the same jumper.
Oh, yes, she did.
And so we could both, if it was cooler, we'd both be modeling our fabulous sweaters. The
Yep,
Baccarat bag by a Space Tricot, and it's a free pattern. And so
wow.
this is the 3 natural tones on
Yep.
mine, and then just some minis from the 8-ply collection in the yoke.
Oh,
So
they look
um,
amazing.
I'm having a full 70s retro thing. My mum always told me I look good in brown, and she made me wear brown as a kid, and I hated it. But anyway, I look good in brown, so now I wear it all the time.
Yep,
And
you get over yourself when you get older, don't you? You're like, "You know what? I don't care if I hated it, now I love it."
now I love it. So here's another good project for those little minis. This
Yep,
another cow, the striped doodle cow by Jamie Lomax, and it's great
yep,
because it just makes it go. So you could just get a little pack of minis and
yeah.
a skein of one of the other colours, and they all work together very nicely and look quite interesting on, I think.
Oh, that looks lovely.
So that's
Wow.
a small project
Do
idea.
you know what's really
Um,
awkward for me right now is I'm looking for some knitting projects. I've been crocheting the same blanket for 2 years,
oh,
and
yeah,
and now I'm like, I'm gonna knit something. The knitting needles are coming in. I am and like I'm like, I could do that one. I could do that one.
yeah,
The hashtag not boring.
not
'Cause I've
boring.
also got a T-shirt that I'm knitting that I've been sort of I started it and then I'm bored because it's all
Yeah,
stockinette in the round in
yeah,
grey.
yeah.
And
I
I love
understand.
grey and I'll wear it, but I'm bored.
You're ready for something with a little bit of interest.
I need
So,
something with a little bit of interest. Yeah, yeah. And
so
so many of what you've just shared has been just like interesting and clever and I love it.
oh, good. So I've got a couple of things for the weekend. I'll be doing $5 flat rate domestic shipping. So
Yep,
if you're a bit trigger happy and you do a few times, that's fine. Just shoot me a little message in one of your purchases and let me know, and I'll refund you the difference. So you're only paying $5 flat shipping. If you make an order over $200, there's no shipping.
yep.
I'll be offering a small number of the kits that I mentioned earlier, and
So get
for each,
in straight away if you want a kit.
yeah. And if you miss out, tune in for the live stream on Saturday at 10:45, and I'll be
Yeah.
giving away one of the kits then, and I'll be giving away
Whoa.
another of the kits at the end of the weekend. Anyone who makes a purchase on my website, I'll write all your names on a piece of paper and put them in my hat, and one
Yep.
of you will get the kit for the blue cow. This one of you will get the pattern for this and the kit for that.
Oh
So I'll
my
do it
goodness.
at the end of the show. I'm going to have a few limited minis, which I never do because honestly, I'm manually winding each mini.
Minis
It
are a
takes me.
pain. Yes.
I don't have a machine right here. I'm kind of got the skein around the chair leg, and I'm counting them. Anyway, so
Oh,
there's a
oh,
lot
I'm
of
cringing for you.
so there'll be limited minis available and taster packs. The taster packs are the ones I mentioned earlier, where you just want to dip your toe in the water with this
And just
non-sugar
try
water,
some of the different wools. Yeah, I love the idea.
one of each of them. So
Yeah,
like one of each of the different yarn bases in there, and
yeah.
you could be creative with it.
Wow.
So.
Gosh, Katrina, there's so much happening. There's so much happening. I'm like, man, I'm gonna be in that live stream. I can't enter it. Um, Be like, Chantelle, hang on, Chantelle's commenting too.
Oh yeah, 10:45 Saturday, man. It'll be a throwdown.
There's gonna be people. Oh my goodness. Katrina, it has been so awesome to get this time to sit and talk with you. And I can't believe it's been 12 months since we chatted last, but it has. It's actually been a little longer, I think. But I'm so glad that we got this time, and I can't wait for Saturday when we have our live stream together and have our throwdown.
I know. It'll be fun. I'll charge my teacup for the event for sure.
Absolutely. You'll need a bigger teacup. No, it's only 15 minutes. You won't need a bigger teacup, but it
Yeah.
needs to be full.
Could be hard tea, as you wish.
Well, we
But you
don't
should
know. We don't know what is in the cup, like you don't know what's in this cup.
No, that's right. That's
That's
right. But it'd
that's
be
the
lovely
joy
to
of
hear
the joy of the internet. You just can never be sure.
the mystery about.
It is a mystery. It's been so good catching up, Katrina, and we will see you at the 10:45 on the Saturday. That's the Melbourne Sydney time, and I will see you then.
I look forward to it. See you, Chantelle. Thank you very much.
Bye,
Bye.
bye for now.